Hi everyone, this is the video summarizing the two chapters to make up for the one missed or the one class where we had to do debates. So we'll just get started and try to make this as quick as possible. The Thompson chapter, the puzzle chapter, I think there's two possible advantages to this chapter. The first, a collective thinking advantage, and the second, a video game advantage. So we'll take kind of each of these in turn. Video games, he's really using video games just as an example of collective thinking in this chapter. Um, so in order to develop this advantage, you'll have to, do a little more research, but there is a lot of research out there on sort of the educational and thinking benefits of video games. Um, so he starts off the chapter by asking, why have video games gotten so complex? And he basically argues that because of networks, people were able to share information with one another and kind of evolve, their skills and their thinking about games, and sort of that collective thinking, the collective smarts produced this kind of cognitive arms race that made people kind of hungry for more and more complex video games. And as games have gotten more and more complex, they've gotten more and more educational as well. Games teach us a lot of things. They teach us problem solving. Obviously, in order to get through a game, you have to figure out kind of what the puzzle is, what the problem is, and move through it. There's a author named John Paul Gee, who argues that video games work exactly like our brains work. That is, our brains, when we're trying to figure out problems, create kind of like simulations in our heads, and then we kind of move around in those simulations and play with them. And the same thing happens in video games, where video games themselves are simulations, and so they allow us to kind of like concretize and have an image of a situation in which then we can figure out kind of best how to act or respond. Video games also teach collaboration skills. There are many games where you're playing with teams or playing with other people, and so you have to learn how to collaborate in order to solve the puzzle or the problem. And I think just critical thinking skills in general, right, is deducing things from limited information, kind of figuring out what's the important information, what's not the important information. These are all skills that we learn from video games. So, like I said, you'll have to do a decent amount of outside research to supplement this argument, but I think it is a strong argument, and also one that is based off of the beginning of the chapter there. Video games also have the advantage of teaching motivation. One of the points that Guy makes is that people say that people these days have really low attention spans, and like the idea that like digital media are destroying our attention spans and stuff. And he points to video games and says, "Look, no, that's not true at all. People will play, hours and hours on end at these very complex games, totally focused. And the issue isn't really attention span. The issue is motivation. That when people are motivated to do things, they have a good attention span and still have as strong of an attention span as ever. And video games teach that motivation, right? They give us the motivation to want to figure out complex puzzles and problems and accomplish them, um, which is different than you might think about like traditional education, where you know it seems abstract, it seems disconnected from your real life, and so motivation is one of the biggest challenges. Whereas, you know, with video games, motivation is sort of built in and whatnot. Um, a couple other notes I'd like to make here about that. One is there's a notion called serious games, and an author, McGonigal, McGonigal. She has a TED talk and some writing and stuff that argues that we can kind of design video games to solve real world problems, to get people to figure out how to actually solve real world problems by simulating those problems. Like there's one about conserving oil, for instance, and people play the game and try to conserve oil. Um, so the and video games have been used. There's educational video games too that can teach specific subjects. So that's idea of like serious games and whatnot can be part of this advantage. Also, I think in constructing this advantage, I think talking about the limitations of traditional education, that it's not active learning, that it's not participatory, that students are just what's often called like the banking model of education, where you're expected to just bank the information and then make a withdrawal and kind of on the test and put it back out, regurgitate it back to the teacher. Isn't a very effective model of education. And video games are, as an alternative, are very effective. They're active learning, they're interactive, they have that motivation factor, and so they're better than that banking model of education. The second advantage is more for the full chapter, and it's the same argument he's making about video games, but making to a lot of other areas, which is that what the internet enables is collective thinking, and collectively our brains are stronger than they are kind of alone. Um, he said we've always had these sort of groups that were out there, but collaborating was difficult, right? Connecting them across distances and time was difficult. And so the internet has made these groups much easier and much more visible. And basically what we've gotten is a flood of amateur collaboration. I think I've kind of talked about this before. Fan groups, sports groups, I mentioned scientists, historians, and on, all can kind of collaborate and learn from one another. And he talks about studies on the wisdom of collective thinking. And I'm pretty sure that if you do searches for collective thinking, you'll find a lot of articles talking about this, about how kind of people thinking together and collaborating are much smarter than people alone. There was a study in 1906 that they had everyone in a crowd guess the weight of an ox, and then they averaged all of those guesses, and they came within a pound of the actual weight of collectively averaged. And there's stories about like the jelly beans in a jar too. The same thing works where you have a bunch of people guess, and you do it out loud, right, in public, so people are guessing and they hear other people's guesses, and so they sort of adjust their guesses based on other people's guesses, and so amazingly, kind of the average ends up being really close to the actual answer. This can have political benefits as well. He mentions this idea in Tahiri, Egypt, where they were able to use sort of their collective thinking as a way to figure out a problem, to bring in supplies when there was a disaster. And I think that there's a lot of political issues where collective thinking is helping in these days, right? Like where, for instance, renewable energy and green energy, where people are, taking the ideas of others and building on those and making them better. And so, the evolution of like green energy is quite rapid these days because of that ability to share knowledge and build off of one another. All right, so that's the collective thinking advantage, a strong advantage. I think don't forget with this advantage that to impact it, right? Like tie it into politics, tie it into, the growth of science, the growth of particular groups. But I do think if you do research on those extra articles on collaborative thinking, you'll find quite a bit of ways to impact it. So for the Seymour chapter on celebrity, I think there's a few disadvantages you could argue here. One, a narcissism disadvantage, that there's a surge of narcissism. Second, a privacy disadvantage, that by posting all this information, by making our lives public, we're losing privacy and some harms that come with that. But overall, I think the advantage is about the disadvantage is about celebrity, that we're all become sort of attention seekers and focused on our image, that we all have our own sort of like personal brands, and in trying to be celebrities and trying to brand ourselves, that maybe we lose something more genuine and authentic about our lives. So the celebrity disadvantage, this is again the chapter overall. So a couple of the impacts you could have to the celebrity disadvantage would be loss of privacy and growth of narcissism. But essentially, he's arguing that social media and the internet creates what's called an attention economy. That is, that we all are sort of seeking attention. That's the sort of scarce resource. Like in an economy, we all seek money. In an attention economy, we all seek attention. And in a way, that turns us all into celebrities. That is, that we all have this sort of image of ourselves that we're managing, like managing a brand in order to generate that attention. Right? We're putting ourselves, our profiles online and whatnot, which makes us all little sort of micro celebrities. This is again built into or designed in the platform, right? The platform kind of makes us feel like the center of attention. It's your page, for instance, uh, and also encourages us, all those addicting mechanisms to post more about ourselves, to stay on there and see what other people are doing. This is his sort of response to the idea that this is just an individual's problem. He knows it's kind of built into or designed into the platform. Um, there's a dark side to all this celebrity. He starts off the chapter talking about how suicide rates and depression rates among celebrities are much higher, how depression and suicide rates have risen in correlation with the rise of social media and the internet. And the reason for that is this, that once you become all sort of image obsessed, then there's this, potential feeling that comes with that everything is fake, right? Everything's just an image, and there's nothing authentic anymore. And obviously, that can be a depressing side effect. He also talks towards the end of the chapter about how this encourages us to spend so much time working on our image of ourselves instead of actually living, that we sort of waste our lives online kind of argument. So that's a good way to impact this. It creates mental health problems. This is mostly tied to the idea of social comparison, right? We're all branding ourselves and putting our images up on the digital mirror. And those are sort of these polished images that we never quite live up to, and we're making social comparisons. So that can create depression and suicide and anxiety and stuff. It can also lead us to worship celebrities. He said there's been a rise in celebrity worship syndrome, and he has an impact that's been tied to negative physical and mental health. There's also this stuff about the rise in live stream of suicides, and you've seen maybe like these debates going on about how some of this stuff, some of our pop culture, and maybe these live streams of suicides makes suicide into this like sort of like attractive or fashionable option. And so people are worried that part of the reason suicide is rising is because you can get attention from even just the threat of a suicide. People also do a lot of horrible stuff to gain celebrity. He tells the story of the friend that live streamed her friend's rape because people were saying they wanted to watch it and encouraging her. And so people do horrible stuff for this celebrity. And again, another impact to all of this is this sort of rise in narcissism. Narcissism is the sort of unhealthy love of self, and it destroys privacy as well. That as we're seeking celebrity, we post more and more information about ourselves. And he has some good stories in there about what happens when when the press or when other people find out about some aspect of your life you maybe wanted hidden. Like he tells a story about one person that was, a swinger, and that became published, and he ended up committing suicide. A privacy disadvantage, obviously, just sort of a subset of this disadvantage. But if we're all encouraged to be celebrities, then we're all encouraged to sort of make our lives public, to share our private information online, which makes it easier to find and steal that information. It also stays around forever, so it can come back to haunt us years later. If we said something when we were a teenager that we don't really agree with now, it might end up costing us our jobs or our friends later in life. That sort of like online mob comes to get us, right? Obviously, there's issues with cyber hacking and identity theft that come with sharing all this private information online. Also, cyberbullying is someone learns something about you, and then they can turn it into cyberbullying issues. And again, suicide, people learn something about you and maybe harass you about it or humiliate you about it. Also, other mental health issues, just that anxiety of worrying that people are going to learn information about you online, that sort of anxiety of being surveyed all the time um, is a potential impact to privacy. Obviously, there's a lot of research out there on the loss of privacy and the harms to it. So, as you do that, I encourage you to tie it into other impacts as well. And finally, the narcissism disadvantage. Basically, the idea here is that there's a rise in sort of like self-centeredness because of the way the platform makes us the center. Right? When we're online, it's my feed, it's my platform. It seems like everybody's responding to me, and also that idea of celebrity again, that we're all kind of become obsessed with our images and branding ourselves, gives us this sort of inflated sense of self-importance, i.e., narcissism. He talks about the selfie as a practice that encourages narcissism. The competition for likes kind of encourages it as well, kind of makes us self-centered as well. Um, he talks about how we're encouraged to act kind of as if we're under a magic spell. And if you know the story of Narcissus, that's sort of what happens with him as he falls under this spell. He sees his image in the lake, in this crystal clear lake, and he kind of falls in love with that image. And there's sort of the same thing going on here as we post our images and filter them, add filters to them, and tweak them. We kind of become obsessed with our image. We become image junkies. And part of the problem is that we do this with filters and we post only the best images, etc., which creates this sort of flawless desirability, right? Again, that we can never live up to. We see if we see other people's images and compare ourselves to those images, then we can never quite live up to them. He says these images are less a tribute to the user as they are testimony to the power that the machine has over them. Right? We become obsessed with likes and attention, and that's a testament to how much the power the machine has over us. And again, maybe we're not really living our lives. We're just living sort of a false image of our lives. Obviously, in the psychological literature, there are a lot of harms to narcissism too, especially the way that it destroys relationships, destroys people around you. It turns out that it's very hard to be in a relationship with a narcissist, and they're some of the most prototypical gaslighters that there are narcissists, where they try to blame other people, make the other people feel like it's their fault for the narcissist's behavior. All right, there we go for the video. If you have any questions, please raise those at the beginning of class, and then we will just jump right into the rebuttals. Enjoy.